Yes, I'm part of the Beyond BP community. I think it's incumbent on me to try and leave you laughing, but I'm not quite sure I'm going to manage that. As David said, my background is slightly different. I'm that sort of cliche. I'm a Clydeside marine engineer. I come from a marine engineering background, and indeed I come from a marine engineering family. I spent most of my career in energy shipping. Roughly half of my time on oil tankers, and the other half of my time dealing with FPSO type issues, LNG type issues, and so forth, as is a lot of a shipping man in an oil major. So I look at this from a slightly different perspective. I'm sort of, Kilroy looking over the wall, but have been involved, I think, pretty much with all of the FPSO projects that BP's been involved with for the last 20 or 30 years, in some small way or indeed in a large way. Let me just talk very quickly about the presentation. I've tongue-in-cheek said simple, or is it? I'll come back to why I use that word in a minute. Then I'm going to talk about making the right choices, an FPSO or something else, and my sort of comments are specifically about FPSOs. They're not about anything that happens in holes in the ground or to a great extent subsurface stuff. Making the right choices, which FPSO you're going to make use of. I'm going to talk a bit about project execution and management, and then hopefully I'll come to some sort of a conclusion, which is always a useful thing to do. So the problems, we've heard about them already, and it's probably not worth my while going over them again. Over budget is one of the problems that we hear about, or is it under budgeted? That's another way of looking at it. In the need to get a project going, have people pared the cost to such a level that the project can't actually deliver on the budgets that are available. So over budget may also mean under budgeted. Late, or alternatively, it could mean over optimistic timelines that could never have been met anyway. So there's another angle to this that's worth thinking about. And then doesn't deliver to the design intent, what I would describe as the quality. Doesn't deliver the production that was expected. It doesn't deliver the quality of the product that was required. It's not reliable. It's forever breaking down, forever requiring long turnarounds in the summer months. It doesn't off-take properly. Nobody's taken into account that you've actually got to get the oil off the back of an FPSO. And then there's safety. The units forever having to be shut down because there are safety issues to be dealt with. This is a bit sort of tongue-in-cheek. So can a project be good, fast and cheap? The argument that the person that produced this has put forward is no. A client can have their project good, fast and cheap in their dreams. And I think what I'm trying to come at from this is that in general terms, when you look at a project, there's cost, there's timeline, and there's quality. You can probably control two of those, but not all three. At least one of them will be an outcome. And you can see here, for example, they're saying you can have it cheap and fast if you don't watch us too closely on the quality. You can have it good and fast when you show us large sums of money to make it work. So there is always going to be a compromise when it comes to running projects. And good, fast, cheap is an unlikely scenario, to say the least of it, unless you've done your forecasting very effectively and been able to hold on to any margins that you built into it. David mentioned in his sort of preamble to this on the internet three root causes: underappraisal of complex reservoirs, inadequate project design and concept selection, and lack of QA of project execution. Well, first of all, that one's gone because I haven't got the faintest idea what it's about. So I'm not going to try and pretend to talk about that subject area. And the last speaker has done a great job of talking about those sort of issues. But really, I think what David's three root causes add up to are so you've got to make the right choices and make them work. It's simple, really. I mean, why do we get so excited about it all? Very cynical indeed. And I've used the word simple here because I wanted to lead into the next slide, because one of the issues that we have in the industry is about simplicity and complexity. And I thought it might be worthwhile just talking about simple organizations, complicated organizations, and complex organizations as they as they relate to projects. So a simple project is one that's understood by everybody, and when you change something in it, it's totally predictable. It might be like building a house, for example. Although, having said that, my brother is building a house on the west coast of Scotland at the moment. His profession is property development, and he's running about a year late. However, he is controlling the cost of the quality very tightly, but that's another thing to think about. A complicated project might be one from my world. For example, building an oil tanker. It's not completely incapable of understanding. People can understand it. It can be modelled. You build Gantt charts. You build economic models. You build assurance plans and all the rest of that sort of stuff. And you can, in all probability, understand it all. And generally, if you bring a change in, it can be understood, but it may still generate surprises if you don't model it properly. You might suddenly find that it has unexpected consequences. A complex system as a whole cannot be understood by individuals, and the classic is the finance markets. If anybody knows exactly how the financial meltdown happened in 2008, please tell me, because I just don't know anybody who fully understands it, and I've read a lot of books on the subject. You certainly couldn't have predicted it beforehand, I think is the main point. And any changes you make to the complex system result in emergent behaviour from the system. It's not, I've pulled lever A and B happens. Things happen potentially in a very unexpected way. A complex project may well be a complex FPSO project. It may have a lot of people involved with it. It may have a complex project structure. There may be a whole bunch of things in it that are fighting against the project's ability to deliver. So I just wanted to put that in there as being something that's worth considering. And also to show you this, which comes from a book called The Global Simplicity Index by some people called Collinson and May. Simplicityandconsulting.com. Two dimensions. One is complexity and profitability. And the general view that this puts forward is that a complex company is something like 10% less profitable than a less complex company. And what they've done here is they've divided up the petrochemical companies into simplifiers, companies that have got a relatively simple model, performers, complicators, people who have made it very complicated and difficult to understand, and strugglers. If you want more detail about this, I would say have a look at the website. My argument, I would say BP probably over the last few years is moving towards the right up there. Probably because of a lot of complexity I added, but that's another issue entirely. But things are getting more and more complicated. I do remember when we were talking about the complexity of the organisation about 5 or 6 years ago, a very senior person in the organisation said that we were going to decomplexify. And that, to me, just summed it up. We couldn't even understand the word simplify. So we were in a major decomplexification project. Okay, so making the right choices. Remember, making the right choices, making it simple. Dead easy, as that annoying little meerkat keeps telling us. And, here's a couple of dimensions. There's so many different dimensions when it comes to deciding whether you're going to use an FPSO or not. And I'm not going to spend too long on this, granny sucking eggs and all the rest of that sort of stuff. Fundamentally, an FPSO is there for a number of different reasons. The depth of the water is one, and the lack of infrastructure is another. You're trying to put in the FPSO bit, which would normally be a fixed platform, a pipeline, an onshore terminal, and an onshore export terminal. So with an FPSO, you're trying to replace the lack of infrastructure. And when you get to FPSOs, you can have simple ones in shallow water, which are maybe spread moored or something like that, or have external turrets and are relatively easy to convert. Or you can have more complex ones in deep water, where you've got internal turrets and a whole bunch of other things, which will drive you to how you're going to manage the project. Let me talk about. I've taken two extreme cases here. I've taken the cash-constrained development case and the economically optimized development case here. And what I'm trying to say here is, FPSO solution for what, and standardization solution for what. If you've got a cash-constrained development, if you don't have any revenue is good revenue. You're not going to bother too much about the quality of that revenue. So it may well be that you're willing to take compromises. And by taking those compromises, you may take something which has been used before. You may take a standardized unit which doesn't optimize right down to the very fine point that you would optimize if you had every choice in the world. So, cash constrained development at one extreme is tending towards leased FPSOs. It's looking at buying second-hand conversions, turnkey packages, innovative solutions, standardized solutions. If you go to the other extreme, the sort of oil super major type optimized development, you're competing with a whole bunch of other projects based on NPV and IRR. It's all very sophisticated. You may well have a low cost of capital versus lease. BP became less keen on the idea of leasing things about 4 or 5 years ago when it was realized that the value was just leaking away into the finance markets. Things may be different now. Accounting practices may disadvantage leases. It may well be that you're recognizing the grey balance sheet anyway, so why would you bother? You've got the ability to optimize down to a very fine point when it comes to production. And integrity management, all the rest of that sort of stuff. You may have some marginal projects, and in those marginal projects, you may move towards the cash-constrained development side of things. And this tends towards, bespoke new builds, rigorous project management, subcontracted design, tried and tested contractors, your own capital, and potentially a longer design and build period because of the aforementioned integrity management and all the rest of that sort of stuff. Those are kind of extremes. There are about 100 different cases sort of in between. So don't take this as being, there are just 2 models in the world. I just wanted to say that when people come to building an FPSO project, well, there's a number of different things that they're going to consider. So it's an FPSO. We've decided it is making the right choices. Which FPSO? What does the FPSO need to do? And primary requirements. It's got to keep the water out. That's kind of fundamental. Because remember, an FPSO without the F is sunk. It's no longer there. Keep the oil in. That's also kind of important. You want it to stay upright. Again, useful. You want it to carry the weight. You want to carry the load of all the stuff that's carried on the deck. And you want it to stay where you put it. You want where you left it in the middle of the North Sea or in the Atlantic frontiers or wherever, where you left it to be the place that it continues to be. You want it to gather and process oil. That's kind of fundamental. And you want it to export oil. So those to me are the primary requirements. And any FPSO has got to meet those requirements. Otherwise, it misses one of the initials, F, P, S, and O. There's some secondary requirements. You want to be able to optimize your production and export. You want to be able to maintain it. You want it to be reliable. You want it to be safe. And actually, you kind of want it to be comfortable for the people on board, because that's a useful thing to have people on board who are relatively happy in what they're doing. You could say that if you're in the capital constrained world, all it has to do is meet the primary requirements. The other ones may be optional, because as long as you're getting some oil out of the ground, you might be happy. That's an extreme, I recognise. It's part of a system, and this is where I get back into my sailor mode. Important to remember that an FPSO is part of the system, and if the O bit doesn't work, you haven't got any revenue. If you can't off-take the oil, then there is no revenue. And there are a number of ways you can deal with that. You can have a specialised project with a shuttle tanker shuttling either from the FPSO to the market, or shuttling to a transshipment terminal, as BP does with Schiehallion and Foinaven, where it can then be picked up by market tankers. Or you could be in a relatively benign world where you don't actually need all of that complexity, and you just bring along conventional trade tankers that load off the back end or load off a buoy. And you probably need a few tugs to help you position it and various other bits and pieces. It's kind of important at the beginning of the project to recognise which of those you're going to do, because that gets you to whether you're going to spread moor it, whether you're going to turret moor it, and a whole bunch of other relatively important details. All of those have been used. Some of them work, sorry, all of those have been used, all of them work, my apologies. There is no model up there that doesn't work. It is not uncommon to get far down a project's development and then say, okay, so we just assumed that there's going to be oil tankers steaming back and forth in front of this, and they'll just come in when they feel like it. In some cases, you might be several thousand miles away from the trade routes. So you've got to think about the offtake bit, because you can be highly embarrassed to declare success on your project and then say, how the hell do we get it off here? Where do we take the oil, and what's going to take it away? Very detailed. I'm not going to go through it. All I'm really trying to say is it is pretty complicated trying to work out all the things that will decide the design of an FPSO. Down the left-hand side, you've got field issues, you've got the environment, you've got legislation, you've got the offtake system, you've got finance on the top, and out of that comes how big is it going to be? Will you be double-hulled, double-sided, single-hulled? The size of the process plant, whether it's connectable or disconnectable, accommodation, mooring system, offtake system, whether veining vessels, spread mooring, dumb or powered, and you've got a critical decision in there, new build or conversion. And I said it's really very simple, you just got to make the right decisions, the right choices. The new build or conversion is a big decision, and you will hear lots of discussion as to whether it's a good idea for a particular one to be new build or a particular one to be conversion, whether it's cheaper, whether it's more reliable. It ain't that simple. New build, the benefits of a new build is it's a nice new clean hull with no history, so it's not been out there battering around the oceans for 20 years and potentially has got some inherent flaws. You can design it for the purpose. You can put the deck supports. You can put the deck support in for a double-decked process plant. You can simplify the structure by making it double-sided. You don't need a double-hulled FPSO, because if an FPSO runs aground, you've really got some pretty big problems. So you just need to make sure that it's double-sided to stop supply vessels going speeding through into the cargo space. And the accommodation can be larger. It can be located forward. A lot of North Sea or a lot of Norwegian FPSOs, you need to place the accommodation forward. The risks, the costs can get high because you've got a limited number of specialised yards. Build yards are into process flow. When you're building a load of oil tankers, they'll spend 4 months in the building dock, and then they'll be taken out and they'll be fitted out. When you start building an FPSO, it takes longer than 4 months. So it's an 8-month cycle then, and that cranks up the price. And makes the yard very reluctant to change anything while you're there, and that's one of the big things about new build yards is they don't like you to change anything. They want what you said at the beginning to be what comes out at the end. But unique designs have unique risks. The simple fact is there's prototype risk. If you design something from scratch and it's never been used before, and maybe you've optimized it for production and used a lot of flat plate in it, it might not stand up that well to heavy weather. There are issues there. Optimization, there's the opportunity for people to optimize, and sometimes unsuccessfully. I've been involved with projects whereas an optimization, large chunks of the FPSO have been taken out to reduce the storage capacity by about 30,000 barrels or thereabouts, and then found it somewhat embarrassing to find that actually the reason it had been designed at the previous size was it fitted the trade and the export market for those cargoes, and then that discounts the oil and discounts your project. Conversion, reduced build time. Well, is it? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes when you start ripping up the deck, you'll find all sorts of strange things in there. It's ship-shaped and it's engined for a disconnectable system. It should be cheaper in theory, but again, you can spend an awful lot of money refurbishing a tanker. And it does have a history. It has been battering around the oceans for 20 years as maybe 270,000 tons of oceanic splendour, but it could have been damaged by that. There's a design risk at feed while hull choices have been made. There's a limit to what you can do when you don't know what you're going to sit the process plant on top of. So there is a bit of chicken and egg in all of this, and people tend to try and lock down the hull pretty early. less suitable hulls than there used to be. Single hull and you see the single hull or double hull. There's few double-sided tankers left out there. There's a limit in deck load, so you may well be just using a single high process plant. Tank and deck repair work can be expensive. Accommodation, again, size and position. It's not going to be big enough for all the people you'll need in an FPSO, and it may need to be positioned at the bow. Let's talk a bit about project execution and management. This is basically fast, quick, cheap. There are three major dimensions, with a fourth one in there. Quality of the outcome, timeline and cost, and those are the three things that the project will be judged on. If you change timeline, cost and quality of outcome, it'll impact on the HSSE. If you try to rush things will happen that bit quicker. There's a chance of incidents. If you try cutting corners to reduce costs, then potentially things can go wrong. So you're continually juggling, and I think one of the sort of project manager images is of somebody continually juggling a ball, and I think they say program management is 3 people juggling balls in a circle and passing them to each other every now and again. So it's not a simple, straightforward job managing a project. But let's talk a bit about the project manager's role. And this comes from David. How am I doing? I'm fine. Right, great. This comes from a book, and I haven't actually attributed it. So apologies to the author, who I hope isn't here today. It comes from a book called The Art of Action by an author called Stephen Bungay. Stephen Bungay is a very interesting guy in that he's a strategy lecturer at Ashridge College, and he's also a military historian. So he combines the two in a lot of this stuff. And this book, The Art of Action, a lot of it is based on the what's called the mission command structure that the German army used very successfully in the Second World War. And out of it, he came to the view that a senior manager, in this case a project manager, has got 3 interlocking tasks. One is directing, which means developing the strategy for the organisation, building the organisation, setting the standards for the organisation. Another one is leading, which is about motivating individuals and teams, and about setting the values and the culture of the organisation. And finally, there's a bit about managing, which is about resourcing, organising, controlling, performance, and the likes of that sort of stuff. There can be a tendency for people to move heavily into the managing box without getting into the directing and leading box, or circles rather than boxes. And one of the results of that is if the only lever that you've got, if the only tool that you've got in your toolbox is management and management tools, you're going to use that tool to deal with everything, whether it be people problems or leadership problems or whatever else. So the danger that you face is your organisation will get very complex very fast as you create more procedures and more process to manage things that can't be managed by process. So the good project manager has got to find a balance between directing the project, providing leadership to the people within the project, and actually the management of the project within that. Talking about matrices earlier, there's a matrix called von Manstein's matrix. I don't know if any of you have run across this. Von Manstein was a German general in the Second World War, and he created a matrix of German army officers, and the dimensions of the matrix were clever, dumb, hard-working and lazy. He very quickly identified that the clever, lazy ones should become generals. He then identified that the dumb, lazy ones should be sent in the front line as quickly as possible and used as cannon fodder. He identified that the clever, hard-working ones were ideal to be staff officers. And he said the ones that you really have to worry about are the dumb, hard-working ones, because they create a massive amount of work for everybody else. And that's the person you don't want in the project manager's role. You want somebody who has some balance between the ability to direct, the ability to lead, and the ability to manage. I think I'm about second from last slide. So what I've tried to do is pick up things that I recall from my own life, both in managing shipping projects and being involved in in offshore projects as to what goes wrong. And I've loosely connected them with the previous slide. Excuse me, just 1 second. Yeah. So if you look at project direction, one of the first things that can go wrong is you've got the wrong project. The project is not right for the place that you're actually trying to deliver it. So wrong project is a pretty fundamental one. Optimistic project goals. The issue that somebody raised earlier about project managers need to stand up and fight and say, well, actually, it's not going to happen in that time scale. It's not going to happen with this cost, and you need to know about that now. So, optimistic project goals. A lot of projects would be successful if the optimistic project goals hadn't taken over, because generally you compromise other things too. Insufficient resource. Is there enough money? Is there enough people? Do you have all of that there? A complex organisation. Have you created an organisation that is so complex that people don't know what's happening within it? And when a person in one corner of the organisation makes a decision somewhere in the other corner of the organisation, doesn't understand why it's been made and doesn't understand the impact it's having on them. And then finally, mission creep. We all know about mission creep. We all know about change management and how you deal with those sort of things. Project management, lack of a coherent plan. If you don't have any sort of a sensible plan, then you're clearly heading towards disaster. Weak performance management. You need performance management to bring you back some ideas of where you're going wrong. Poor change management, again, links with the mission creep thing. When you change something, it's going to affect quality, it's going to affect timeline, it's going to affect cost. So make sure that you've factored all of those sort of things into it. Poor safety. If a project has a poor safety record, then it's forever going to be stopped either by the regulators or by the organisations themselves, as they say, this is just not what we want. And again, weak, poorly managed interfaces in a project which can have a lot of subcontractors involved with it. If you haven't managed the interfaces properly, if you haven't been the integrator that was mentioned earlier, then you're heading towards all sorts of problems. Getting into project leadership, weak leadership. So if there's nobody controlling the project, then it's not really going to go anywhere. The opposite end of the scale, you've got macho management. You've got the person that says, I don't care what you say to me, this is going to be delivered at this point in time for this much, and it's going to be done to this quality. And I'm not listening to you when you tell me that something has gone completely wrong and it's not going to make that. Inappropriate reward is motivation is a big issue, because a lot of the oil companies in the late 2000 to 2010 period decided it would be a good idea to use motivation and bonus systems that had come from the financial world. We know how effective those bonus systems in the financial world have been in making the people within those organisations very rich. We know how effective they've been at destroying organisations. So one of the things you have to be careful of is over-incentivizing people to do things that are actually against their own instincts, professional norms, and all the rest of that sort of stuff. So be careful with performance management linked to inappropriate rewards, because you can very quickly end up with some quite unexpected results. Inappropriate values and culture. Do you have a fear-based organisation, a blame-based organisation where people are afraid to speak up? Do you have an organisation which lacks any sort of ethical values and are quite happy to cut corners, to bribe people, to do all sorts of stuff like that? Those sort of things will quickly chip away the foundations of an organisation. And then you have to look into, again, some of the things that we talked about earlier, knowledge and skills, so project knowledge, and weak or non-existent standards for the kind of project you're doing. No relevant legislation, so you don't have to follow any rules. And no operational input, because it goes back to the point that was made earlier. You need to actually get your operational people involved, otherwise they arrive on the day before the FPSO is towed out of the yard and look at it and go, well, I can't work that. It just doesn't work. So you need to get the operational people involved at a reasonably early phase so that there's a more or less bumpless transfer between the two. Again, back to people, inadequate skills. Do we have the skills in the industry? Missing teams. Sometimes whole teams are completely missed out of the organisation because it's become so complex. People don't recognise that. And then contracts, lots of stuff there. No pre-qualification. You use contractors that aren't capable of doing the job. You're looking at the best cost for the project, not the best value. So you're really just looking at the cheapest. You're not looking at how it contributes to the organisations, to the project as a whole. Inappropriate incentives in the contracts that drive subcontractors to do different things to the objectives of the project. Inexperienced contractors outfits with no pre-qualifications. Weak contract, that if the contract is so weak that you've got no recourse in law if things go horribly wrong, then you're in a difficult place. And weak specifications. If you can drive a coach and horses through the specification, then anything extra clearly ends up in your door and not anywhere else. Conclusions. Good, fast, cheap, you can't manage them all. Go back to what I said earlier. At least one of them will be an outcome. The trick is recognising what that outcome is and managing people's expectations around that. It's all about making the right choices and making them happen, which again is very glib, but is fundamentally what it's all about. Choose the right project for the environment, for the physical environment, the economic environment. Choose the right design for the project, economics, offtake, environment again. And project direction, leadership and management are crucial in actually getting the project delivered in a sensible manner. And finally, questions, please.
Let me ask you a question, because, as I said, I apologised earlier for Oz Clint not being here. Bernstein Research send out 10 or a dozen reports, reviews every week, as far as I'm concerned. I hit my in tray 2 or 3 a day sometime. One that they did a couple of months ago talked about standardisation. In fact, it was called a new Standard Oil, I think, or Standard Oils. What is the thing that mitigates? So take an area like West Africa, where you could say the environment and the economics of deep water developments are similar and benign all the way from Namibia round to Senegal. What is the thing that mitigates against standardising, cutting the developments there, so you have basically the same FPSO done 25 times?
So I guess it's back to the water depth and all the rest of that are the same, but the reservoirs are different, the production rates are different, and all the rest of that sort of stuff. So if you want to cookie cutter it, you can cookie cutter it, but you're going to make some sort of compromise. So it may well be that one field's capable of turning out 170,000 barrels a day, another one can do 120, and you've got a standardised unit that does 150. So if you are willing to accept that compromise and you're willing to accept the benefit of that compromise, which is you'll probably get the thing into service that bit quicker and get NPV from the earlier startup, then you should be able to do it. But the problem is that each of those fields are probably going to have completely different partners in them. And the guy who's got the 170,000 barrel field that's only producing 150 is going to say, well, why should it be mine that's compromised? So you've got all the partner politics sort of issues, in my opinion, that will mitigate against it, as well as each reservoir is different to some degree.
Graham,
Can I add a supplemental point there? It's one that I've certainly experienced. I think, David, you were sort of thinking about Angola, Block 15, SO, Shikonga, Kizomba. They did with MODEC and SBM conversions. The point I want to make is a tangential one. My experience there in a PSA environment was that the government didn't want to be beholden to standardisation. It didn't want all its oil field services being run by Schlumberger Halliburton and be beholden to one supplier. So the government mechanism through the PSA tendering processes caused variation and non-standardisation. So they had a say in the matter, because under a PSA, you get it back in kind, and in effect, it's their money, is the way they see it. So that's another thing, particularly in PSA environments, that prevent it.
Yeah.
We did give some, sorry, just...
Simon, why don't Greg and Marcus and Simon, why don't you come up here as well, and then we
Yeah,
can
yeah.
start the panel properly.
There's in